Head of Research and Partnership at Sannam S4. As the moderator in today's webinar, it is my responsibility to introduce the topic, presenters, and set the stage for today's session. India's Union Budget for 2015-16 was presented on Feb 28 by the Finance Minister, Mr. Arun Jaitley. India's budget has slowly become an extravaganza over the years. The budget 2015-16 has already been hailed as a super budget, which is expected to put India firmly on the growth path. In this webinar today, we are showcasing our analysis of the budget and present the highlights that are relevant to foreign investors and foreign businesses operating in India. We take a closer look at the announcements made in the budget and highlight the changes that impact you and your business. Please allow me to introduce the most capable panel today. Kapil Dua is the CFO and Director of Financial Consulting at Sannam S4. He continues to guide several foreign businesses setting up in India. Joining Kapil in the panel is Abhinav Sood, Deputy Manager for Tax and Regulatory Consulting at Sannam S4, and we are excited to hear from him on the tax and policy announcements that were recently made in the budget. Before we begin the session, here is a quick update on how the webinar is structured. We will introduce audience polls and we'll hold a Q&A session at the end of the webinar. But as in our previous webinars, we may open up the questions to the panel as relevant as the panel member finish providing their highlights. During the presentations, if you do have a question, type them in the chat window that you see, and we will have the panel experts address your questions. And thank you for joining us today. And let's begin this presentation by first opening up a poll question. Okay, the poll question must be visible in front of your screens now. The question is, how much information do you have about the proposals presented in India Budget 2015? Bit of a sense check for us. We have the following three options. I have been actively following the India Budget 2015 for my business plans and operations in India. The second option is I have only some idea of what the Budget 2015 has in store for foreign investors. And the third option, of course, is I'm not following this year's budget. Yeah, we will keep the poll open for another 10 seconds. Please choose the option. Okay, we see the response coming in. Just a few more seconds. Okay, let's finish the voting. Thank you for providing your inputs. We see that most of you have suggested that you have some idea of what the Budget 2015 has in store for foreign investors, which validates our idea in terms of organizing this budget, where we wanted the budget highlights to be provided and focused entirely on foreign businesses and investors who are doing business in India. So let me close the poll and take you to this presentation right away. Okay, so as we have mentioned before, this budget is going to only focus on the highlights and the tax and the policy proposals which will impact and bring about a change in the way with which the foreign investors and the foreign businesses operate in India. I do have to note and acknowledge that this is the first full year budget since we had a stable government and a government with an absolute majority that has been set up in May last year. The Finance Minister, Mr. Arun Jaitley, has always been saying that this budget is all about improving the investor sentiment in India, and you will see very shortly as to why he is right. And India has been making the right noise over the last 10 months and has been talking a lot about ease of doing business in India being better than what it is, and hence, of course, is the primary theme for this budget. And before we actually move into some of the highlights of what this budget really brings on, and whether we have our panel experts agree as to how the highlights will help foreign investors, let's take a quick look at some of the macroeconomic indicators. Let's also acknowledge why India is in an extremely growth path now. Yeah. So if you really look at some of these factors, you will see that in India, inflation shows a declining trend, which is always a good thing to be at. The current account deficit stands at 1.3% of the country's GDP. The fiscal deficit target of 4.1% of GDP has been achieved in 2014 and 15. And there is now a roadmap for achieving a 3% deficit by financial year 17 and 18. The stock markets always the first to cheer every time any of the reforms are announced, or the fact that the government is able to introduce a growth-oriented budget. Recently, it touched 30,000 in the Sensex markets and continues to keep the investors happy. GDP growth, it's been good days. It's expected to be 8.1 to 8.6% in financial year 15-16. Some of the experts have actually said that the double-digit growth trajectory seems extremely close now, which is an excellent news for investors. Indian rupee holding its position. In the famous words of our finance minister, it is considered to be on the top 6 to 8% on an average to the foreign currencies. The foreign investment, it's again good news. The total investment has gone up by 40 billion if you look back. And the forex reserves are at a good place. It's at $340 billion. So if you consider all the different kind of macroeconomic indicators, you would agree that India is in fact is at an extremely exciting place. Now, let's look at what the budget has actually opened up for the foreign investors. And let me actually ask a couple to provide his immediate views in terms of where he sees the budget introducing the so-called reforms and the good news that has been provided. Couple, your thoughts as to the highlights of the budget?
Thank you, Krish. Before I even get into the highlights, I must say this is one of the most friendly foreign investor budget I've seen from the finance minister. So one of the indicator when you help foreign companies, foreign investors to come to India to invest into the Indian market, one of the indicator is how to implement their strategy. How you make it ease as much as possible for doing business in India. So let me straight away get into the proposal which has been highlighted, this budget, which will have big impact on India's ranking, which currently stands at 142, to bring it down to 50 within, as the finance minister he would like to do that, is to how do we make it easier for the foreign investors to come into India. And foremost, the most important change which has come into the recent budget is reduction in the corporate tax rate. So there is a proposal that the interest, specifically the domestic or even the foreign companies having subsidiaries in India, the corporate tax rate for companies in India is proposed to be reduced from 30% to 25% in next 4 to 5 years in a phased manner, which means they will not touch, or the government will not touch, the corporate tax rate as of now for this financial year 15-16, but from 16-17 it is proposed to reduce, say, 1% or 1.5% every year, to reduce it to 25% in next 4 years. So which is a very big welcome change for foreign companies who thinks the India tax rate, the corporate tax rate, is on a higher rate. Even if you compare with UK, you compare with some other growing or developing nations in Asia. So I would say this is the biggest change in the current budget for the corporates, or specifically the foreign companies who are thinking and comparing the Indian market with the other overseas market. Then the biggest change, another change, is wealth tax. So wealth tax was earlier prevalent in India for a number of years. Is a tax on the wealth of individual companies. So, for example, a corporate having assets in India in the form of cars, other assets, office equipment, specifically the building, land building, the motor cars. So they were supposed to pay wealth tax at the rate of 1%, but now they have totally abolished that act, which means there is a less amount of, to be honest, the paperwork, the filing for the corporates in India to pay for taxes and spend more money in just to governing those taxes. That's also a welcome change. The biggest change for our existing clients, for the foreign companies who are doing business in India or with India, for example, a foreign company supplying services or providing advisory services, technical know-how, royalties to the Indian corporates, it's the biggest change for them in terms of reducing the withholding tax rate for those companies from 25% to 10%. So now within the act, the rate has reduced to 10%, which means even if you have a beneficial tax rate within the double taxation avoidance agreement between India and your home country, which goes from 10% to 25% in different treaties, but the tax rate in Indian income tax has reduced to 10%. So you will be subject to less amount of taxes withheld in India. And mind you, one more big change in this context they have done is to the government will be coming with new rules and regulation in how would you take credit of taxes withheld in India, which is a difficult task as of now in terms of paperwork. So if Indian company have deducted 10%, 15%, 25% withholding tax, which is in Indian terms called TDS, and they will ask, okay, you can take a credit in your home country, but the paperwork is not easier. So one of the changes which has been proposed by the finance minister is to do specific rules and regulation that how do you take credit of taxes withheld in India. Another welcome change being taken in very positive manner by the Indian stock market is the proposal where GAR, the General Anti-Avoidance Rules, has been postponed or deferred for 2 years. If I explain in a very brief manner, so GAR is something which was proposed a few years back by the government, the previous government, is to avoid any tax evasion structures. But since it was drafted in a manner that it was covering every each and every company, even if you are framing legitimate transactions, so it was covering those transactions as well. So as it stands today, that's why the industry, the market is positive or feeling good about it, that it has been postponed. So the government will get 2 more years to correct changes, to mitigate any risk of covering the legitimate transactions, so that all good or legitimate transactions should not be affected by the GAR provisions. That's good change. One more big change, I would say it's definitely a big change, because foreign investors are always worried about Indian retrospective amendments, the capital gain taxes. So what has been done by the finance minister is changes in the definition of indirect transfer. So, for example, if you have heard about the Vodafone case in India, what has happened with the Vodafone in terms of demand from the tax authorities for capital gain taxes payable in India. So there has been change proposed by the finance minister in the indirect transfer definition, which means if you have a foreign holding company having underlying assets in India, and you are selling the foreign holding company shares or transferring some sort of capital holding of that company, ultimately the underlying assets are in India, so you are subject to capital gain tax in India as the law stands today. But they have proposed to change the definition so that the small and medium enterprises, where, for example, if the underlying assets is less than 1.6, $1.7 million, and the total composition of the Indian asset is less than 50% of the foreign holding company, then you would not be subject to capital gain tax, which I see as a big change from a compliance point of view, for tax payment point of view. So it is definitely welcome change. And one more change related to the indirect transfer is when two foreign companies are merging together, having amalgamation, and one of the company or both the companies having underlying assets in India. There was ambiguity earlier where if you are merging even the two foreign companies but having assets in India, there was supposed to be capital gain taxes payable in India because of the merger happening overseas. But now they have exempted by putting this proposal where if the underlying assets are in India, so you would not supposed to pay capital gain taxes. One more big change: goods and service tax. So this is the new act which we are talking in India. I would say from last 3-4 years, and there has been roadmap which has been generated by the previous government, is to talk about that how do we merge our three different indirect taxes: VAT, which is a tax on goods; service tax, which is a tax on services; and excise duty, which is tax on manufacturing in India. And now there is a proposal which was going on for the last few years, is to combine all these three acts so that you can take input credit of one tax with the other tax, and there will be less compliances, documents, filings, which you are supposed to do with the government of India in terms of authorities. Combined authority will be there. So it's a welcome change, and I can bet you that India will be a different landscape when this GST will come, and it is proposed to come from 1st of April 2016, which is I would say it's a very big change. A few more changes in terms of ease of doing business in India. Say, I have always been receiving, whenever I meet my clients overseas in US, UK, and few other countries, is why do we need to raise physical invoices in India? Why do we need to sign those invoices? And what do you mean by original copy? Because I've sent you the copy of the invoice online or by scanned document. So that's one change which has been admitted by the finance minister. We also wrote to finance minister as one of the change which we are looking for the foreign companies, that they are used to international principle whereby they can issue invoices, they can keep records online in a digital form. So they have admitted. So the new change says that for excise duty and service tax, you can maintain your documents online in terms of digital documents. You can issue invoices digitally, and you can keep all the records related to those two taxes in digital form. Similarly, the one of the big boosts given to these two different acts is now you can get registration under excise duty and service tax within 2 working days. You can do the post-filing paperwork, but you will get the number of service tax within 2 working days, which means you can invoice. You can start invoicing after 2 days with that number, which was earlier a barrier, and it was taking, I think, at least 3 to 4 weeks, even if we can be fast in submitting those papers. Another big change, there is a new portal which has been opened by the Ministry of Corporate Affairs and the government authorities, where more than 14 filings which you can do online. To give you an example, when you are selling shares or transferring shares of an Indian company to a foreign shareholder, you are supposed to file a form called FCGPR or FCTRS, which you have to submit to the Indian banker, who will in turn submit to the Reserve Bank of India, and so on. You keep on working with the Indian banker and Reserve Bank of India. Now they have abolished all those regulations. They said now you can do online. Now you can just fill up the form online and file, and similarly other regulations. So you can get licenses online for more than 14, 15 different regulations. Definitely very good welcome change. There has been changes proposed in streamlining the penalties imposed under the indirect taxes. There has been changes which has been proposed under the input tax credit. So for example, if you have service tax as one of the taxes which you charge to your customer, and similarly your vendors are charging service tax on the expenses which they have charged on you, you are allowed to take a credit. But a few years back, the government, they changed it to that you have only 6 month limit to take credit, input credit on your invoices. Now they have increased that to 1 year, which means it's a good change that now you have more time to claim credit. And another change I would just want to highlight is is to come up in terms of more international recognition principle like bankruptcy code. So they are framing up the new regulation and laws for the bankruptcy code, which would be, I think, similar to the Chapter 11 in US, like you have other bankruptcy regulation in few other countries. So in and all, I'm very positive about the changes which has been proposed by the finance minister for ease of doing business in India. And if not 50, we will definitely come with under 100 in some near future.
Brilliant. Kapil, thank you so much for those highlights. I see that there are a lot of questions that are coming in, and I don't want to keep some of these questions towards the end. So let me actually select one of the participant question and present it to you. Kapil, we all saw that the markets cheered as soon as GAR was postponed by 2 years. Here is a question: why doesn't the government scrap GAR altogether?
Sorry, I'm laughing because I don't think so. The government will be inclined to totally scrap it, because they have spent a number of years. They have agreed to all the different industry and market and people in different regions to agree to the GAR principle. And the whole idea of getting GAR into the business is to curb black money, to come up with the principle where you can come up to the structure which are purely from a tax evasion point of view. It's just that I think the government has to do is to redefine few of the definition under the GAR, so that you would not try to disturb the business which are more legitimate transactions. So it will. I don't think they will totally scrap it. because it's towards getting more business into India, where you will do a better structuring, better transactions. You know how to structure your business. Instead of scrapping it, it will be very difficult to scrap it.
Okay, thank you for that, Kapil. I see there are more questions coming in. Please continue to enter the questions in the chat window. We will definitely open these questions to the panel at the right time. And definitely we will have a good amount of time at the end of the presentation so that we can run through all your different questions. I don't want to keep us away from discussing about the tax and the policy proposals. So Abhinav, could I just open the presentation to you?
Thank you so much, Vish. And Kapil rightly pointed out as to there are so many changes that are proposed in the budget this year that are pro-business. I'm going to try and cover other key tax and regulatory policies that have been announced by the new Modi government. Some of them may be bad news, but there's a definite overall, high that people have that a good and a pro-business budget has been produced. If I talk about corporate tax rates first, that's the most important. As Kapil rightly pointed out, they have not touched the corporate tax rates yet for this year. However, there will be some changes next year onwards. For if you have a domestic company in India or if you have a limited liability partnership in India, you will be continued to tax it at the basic rate of 30%. If you have a liaison office or a project office, you will continue to be taxed at 40%. However, what's changed is the surcharge rates. Now, the surcharge rates have increased by 2%, and this is on a graded basis. So, if you are earning, a taxable income of more than INR 10 million in India, the surcharge increases from an existing 5% to 7%. Similarly, if you have a taxable income of more than 100 million INR, it increases from 10% to 12%. And this increase in surcharge also applies to dividend distribution tax. It also applies to minimum alternate tax, which is the minimum tax on book profits in India. So there is definitely sort of an effective overall increase in the corporate tax rates. There's a similar increase in service tax. It has been increased from 12.36%, that's 12 plus 3% cess, to 14% all inclusive. However, there is another cess of 2% that has been proposed, which is a clean energy cess, bringing the overall rate to 16%. So there is a market increase in service tax rates from 12 to 16%. And this is primarily to facilitate transition into GST, which Kapil talked about a few minutes earlier, but definitely in the short run, it is going to be a little hard-hitting. General excise duties have been marginally increased from 12 to 12.36 to 12.5%. Basically, the cess has been removed and a 0.5 has been added to the basic rate. With this, the custom duties also, marginally increased because they are linked to excise duty rates. So that is one very minor change that people should take cognizance of. Domestic transfer pricing is a big change that has been proposed, and it's a very, very welcome relaxation. If you have a couple of more subsidiaries or more in India, the transactions between those related parties are required to be benchmarked. However, there was a threshold limit on the quantum of transactions, which was 50 million, that is almost 8.3 million US dollars. Up till last year. From this year, from April 1, 2015 onwards, it has been proposed to increase this threshold limit to 200 million INR. That's almost 3.33 million US dollars. That's a very, very welcome change for small and medium enterprises who are doing business in India and have multiple operations, transactions between those entities below this 3.33 million US dollars will not be subject to the transfer pricing rigors. It's a very, very welcome change, and it was a hassle for many small and medium enterprises in the past. Another very big development is the introduction of the place of effective management. Simply put, if you are a foreign company not registered in India, but some key decisions are being taken in India, or you have a board which is majority situated in India, there is a chance that you could have a place of effective management in India and therefore a deemed permanent establishment. This in turn could result into a very aggressive tax situation for you, where almost 40% of your profits which you are earning from India would be subject to tax in India, and there could be protracted litigation in this matter. Uh, you know, you need to be very mindful going forward if you're a foreign company, and even Indian companies who have subsidiaries abroad and but are taking key decisions in India itself. Place of effective management rules could drastically and considerably affect you. There are some miscellaneous documentation requirements that have been increased. So if you're an expat working in India, you have to make some more reportings to your employer to process your salary. This would be in terms of income from house property or other income sources, losses that you have from other sources. The documentation requirements for employees in India is already very robust, so it's set to increase a little more in the coming future. Um, what is also increased in terms of reporting is the reporting of foreign assets that is required now in the income tax return. You are required to do so even previously, but the quantum of reporting has sort of increased. So there would be some more reporting requirements for you. Do keep mind of that when you're filing your annual tax returns next year. One very, very big compliance change that has been brought about is the requirement of furnishing information to the tax authorities whenever any payment is being made outside India to a non-resident. So this while this might be just a compliance requirement, it will be a lot many issues could arise for foreign players because they have transactions with their customers in India or the subsidiaries in India. They would need to report each and every transaction to the tax authorities, and not doing so invites penalties and interest and associated costs. So this is a very, very big compliance requirement that has come along. Moving on, I mean, there are a lot many other proposals that we can talk about. What we've covered here are just a few of them. For example, provident fund requirements. Withdrawal from a provident fund, which is essentially a social security contribution in India. Any withdrawals from those funds for employees, especially expats who are working in India, will be subject to withholding tax. That is something that needs to be taken cognizance of when you're making any withdrawals. And already, withdrawals for expats is quite a difficult task for them in India. There's a very, very big relief that has been given to foreign institutional investors. Traditionally, what used to happen was the transactions for listed securities and long-term capital gains would be exempt from tax. However, because of having a minimum tax on book profits and these gains being reported as profits in their books, they had to pay an 18.5% tax on those profits. The new government has done away with this sort of anomaly and brought about an exemption that all capital gains would be excluded while computing MAT for foreign institutional investors. So this is a very, very welcome change, and there's a straight away 10 to 20% increase in the profit base for foreign institutional investors in India. If you're an offshore fund manager, if you're an Indian or anybody who's working abroad but for managing a fund in India, you could come back to India now, stay in India and keep operating your fund. Earlier, what used to happen was these funds were deemed to have a business connection in India, even though they were based outside India, by virtue of their managers being situated in India. So to bring back these managers to the home country, they have the new government has sort of given an exemption. There are a lot of conditions and definitions which are prescribed, but if you're adhering to them, then there's definitely a tax break for you. All these proposals that Kapil has talked about, that I have talked about, have been majorly brought about from the direct tax code. They've been, introduced from there even last year and the years before. So the new government fees that bring the direct tax code into practice now may not be a real possibility because already a lot of provisions have been adopted in the existing law. But what Finance Minister Arun Jaitley has mentioned in his speech, that there is a need for a new tax regime which is internationally competitive, which is much more simpler and efficient. So while direct tax code might not see the light of day, there is definitely scope for more rationalization and more reforms coming out in the direct tax area. Um, Foreign portfolio investments were separate from foreign direct investments up till now. However, the new government has proposed to rationalize and bring about all under the same umbrella of FDI. So this is a welcome relaxation for all foreign investors under the FDI regime. There will be composite, sectoral caps that would be defined for each sector. So you need not worry whether you're a portfolio investor or a direct investor into the Indian market. Everything will be same for you now. So that's a welcome rationalization. There have been changes for alternate investment funds, by virtue of them being deemed as pass-through status now. So there will be no double taxation for them. FIIs and QFIs continue to have a concessional withholding tax rate of 5%. It was 5% up till last year, but the sunset clause was only till 31st March. This has been extended for two more years. That's a very welcome change. Black money, has been a cause of concern for a lot of investors around the world, not just in India but abroad as well. It is very, very heartening to see that this new government is introducing a lot of steps to curb black money and tax evasion in India. There is a list of proposals that have been announced. For example, you have to quote your PAN number in high-value transactions. There is a new black money law that has been proposed. There have been changes proposed in foreign exchange regulation to control capital inflows. There have been other, transaction acts are proposed to be amended too. There's a whole list of amendments which are being proposed, and some of them are very welcome. So if India is able to curb this tax evasion, it will go a long way in giving relief to people who are actually engaged in bona fide transaction in India and reduce the tax cost for them. It's a very welcome change. For bankers, for foreign banks who have a branch in India, earlier your transactions with your, especially interest with your sort of foreign branches, interest payments to your foreign branches were not subject to withholding tax. There's a change now; they will be subject. It's been a matter of litigation for quite some time, so they've laid this matter to rest now with this amendment. So foreign banks do need to take cognizance of this going forward. There are many, many other proposals. I mean, this is just a tip of the iceberg, both for Kapil and me, and we obviously discuss offline many other changes that have been proposed in this budget.
Thank you, Abhinav. I think those are definitely a good collection. I'm sure it is handpicked of highlights of the tax and the policy proposals in the budget. I want to move forward, but we have a lot of questions that are coming in, and I want to make sure that our audience also find an opportunity to interact with the panel. Directly coming back to you, Abhinav, of the different things that you said, here is a question for you. How do you see the corporate tax reduction from 30 to 25% being played out?
This Kapil rightly talked about it. It is going to be in a phased manner over the next 4 years. I do see, I mean, we've been talking about this a lot, and we've been watching a lot of policymakers discuss this on the media. It's going to be, say, for example, 1.5% every year from next year onwards as a reduction. But the finance minister also did mention in his speech that, because of the tremendous loss to the exchequer, because due to this reduction, there will be some withdrawals on exemptions and concessions that are given to corporates in India. So the government will try to play a balancing act, and definitely there will be a tax reduction for typical businesses who are operating in India. So what will go away will be just very peculiar exemptions that are given, and there will be a definite reduction in corporate tax rates, so that we are at par with what the developed world is.
Okay, Abhinav, thank you for that. I want to turn to Kapil. I think with the kind of time that we had and the treatment that we wanted to give in today's session, I think fairly technical at what we have discussed so far. We have nonetheless talked about some very interesting changes that have been proposed in the union budget. For the sake of the audience, and also all the investors and the foreign businesses who are doing business in India, having understood the kind of changes that are coming through, what do you think they should do now? What are the kind of checklist or the to-do items or the changes that they must respond to?
first foremost, check with us how these proposals are coming in and what are the proposals. Is there any change before the enactment? So just to highlight, uh, all the direct tax proposal which we have just highlighted and others which we have not highlighted specifically for the foreign investors, these changes will be applicable from 1st of April 2015, and indirect tax changes would probably be applicable from end of May or first week of June when this bill, finance bill, get enactment after signing of President of India. So these are the two different dates for these tax changes. But definitely do check with us how these proposals are coming in. Is there any further changes in these proposals? GST and GAR. So I would say these two areas which you should definitely look into if you are coming into India, if you're thinking to come to India, you've done financial modeling, how your business will look like. Have you think about GST? Have you thought about GAR, that how your corporate structuring will look like once the GAR will be into action? And ensure that you are not on the, you are on the right side of the law, and see all the final changes which has been done in specific India. And we are more than happy to help you in guiding those provisions and specific changes which applicable to your businesses.
Okay, Kapil, thank you for that. I do have a whole question that I want to open up to our participants, but before that, I want to bring about some of these questions that have been coming through. Let me actually direct this one at Abhinav. Abhinav, would short-term capital gains for FAI will also be excluded from MAT?
So short-term capital gains will only be excluded if a tax called security transaction tax has been paid on them. So that traditionally means that you have done it on a listed stock exchange. And otherwise, if you're doing off-market transactions, they will not be excluded from computation of minimum alternate tax. So if you are having short-term capital gains from off-market deals as FIIs, you will be subject to MAT in India.
Okay, thank you for that. Couple, coming over to you. Here is a question. We intend to divest shares of a Singapore company which holds 100% in our India business. Can you tell us more about the applicability of indirect transfer in this case?
Good question. So if you're already having existing company in Singapore having underlying assets, for example, you have a wholly owned subsidiary in India, and you are selling or transferring shares of your Singapore company, which are ultimately you are transferring shares of Indian company because it's owned by a Singapore company. So it will be beneficial to you if you do not fall into the new definition, which is exemption given under the indirect transfer. So if the Indian assets being transferred through Singapore shareholding company, and if the Indian assets are less than 1.7 million USD, and if the Indian assets are less than 50% of the total assets of Singapore company or shares of Singapore company which has been transferred, then you will not fall into the indirect transfer. So you will not be having any capital gain issues. But mind you, this is an act. This is what has been written or defined as a proposal in the Indian Income Tax Act. Whatever has been there in the India and Singapore tax treaty will anyway override this, and that is a beneficial treaty. So even if you do not qualify as per these threshold limits, but you can still take the exemption of capital gain taxes under Singapore treaty. If you have a limited benefit clause, means you are spending more than $200,000 in last 2 years in Singapore, so you will still be out of the capital gain taxes in India.
Okay, Kapil, thank you for that. And just a note for the participants, we are doing our best to have these technical queries addressed right here in the webinar. But we will also be happy to clarify some of your questions and have a follow-up at the end of this. So please don't mind if your questions are not all of them are addressed right here, but we will try our best to present them and make sure that our panel also responds to these questions with as much clarity as you would like. Abhinav, I'm going to come to you. You talked about the transfer pricing and you talked about the 200 million in Indian rupee. Sounds fantastic. Does the trigger for transfer pricing of 200 million INR also apply to international transactions?
Unfortunately, no. If you're having a single rupee or a dollar of transactions with your subsidiaries in India, overseas, and you would be subject to transfer pricing. There is, however, relaxation which is already there in the Indian Income Tax Act, that if your total quantum of transactions is less than 10 million INR, you're not subject to the rigorous documentation requirements. However, that doesn't preclude, or that doesn't anywhere say that even if you have a rupee or single dollar transaction, you will not be subject to transfer pricing. This threshold limit of 200 million INR or 3.33 million US dollars does not apply to international transactions.
Okay, thank you for that. I think I have another question that I have to follow up again with you, Abhinav. Can you tell us a little bit more about the place of effective management rules?
Right. So, as I mentioned earlier, this place of effective management rules has been, brought about from the direct tax code, and there are a lot of international, case laws and judicial precedents that talk about place of effective management. These rules are also in place in many developed nations like the UK or other developed countries. But there is the Indian Tax Act as it stands today, and the proposals that have been announced in the budget 2015 don't really give a very exhaustive definition. So they just talk about decision making or having a board which is situated in India. There are many other situations by which you can actually be having a place of effective management in India. Are you taking any decision in India with regard to your India business or outside? Are you, what are the places where you're performing those functions? Where is your board sitting? How many people are there on the board which are in India? Are key decisions being taken in India or outside India in terms of quantum of numbers and in terms of how vital that decision is for your business? These are some of the questions that you need to ask, and if it is ticking the wrong boxes, then you could have an adverse tax situation in India.
Abhinav, thank you for that. Couple, we have some great looking questions for you, and also some open ones which any of you can actually answer. But let me come back to you, Couple. This seems highly technical. We are a UK-based company, have a PAN, but not a PRC. As such, 25% TDS applied to us up till now. What would be the new rate?
So, simple new rate would be specifically 10%, because this has been now reduced from 25 to 10. Since you already have a PAN number in India, it's 10%. If imagine you would not have a PAN number for other participants who don't have a PAN number, then the tax rate goes to 20%.
Okay. Couple, I think I also have to come back to you on this one. I have a subsidiary in India. Can I issue scanned invoices from abroad going forward, looking at the proposed amendments for digital records?
Answer is yes. If those invoices are covering service tax as one of the element, or even excise duty invoices, means on those manufacturing, if you have excise duty. So both these service tax and excise duty, you can issue invoices, you can maintain records in digital form.
Okay, thank you for that. Abhinav, you talked about expats, and so we have an extremely innocent looking question. It says, are there any more changes for expats that you can talk about?
Yes, definitely. When you look at the fine prints in the budget, there are many changes. For example, the surcharge increase is also applicable to individuals. So if you are having a taxable income as an expat of more than 10 million INR in India, you would be subject to this increased surcharge rate of 7% instead of 5% earlier. There are some relaxations given in terms of investment linked deductions. So there is this section called the ATC in the Income Tax Act, where you could make some investments or make some insurance, take on some insurance agreements and pay some insurance premium. Those limits have been enhanced. There is also, I mentioned about the withdrawals from Provident Fund being subject to withholding tax. So that is a very important factor that expats need to note in India. Definitely many more changes. And if you look at the fine print, there are some key withholding tax requirements and reporting requirements that are required for expats now.
Okay. Thank you, Abhinav. Couple, I need to come back to you on GST. I'm selecting just one of the questions here. I'm into training and consultancy services. Do we need to worry about GST?
It will be a benefit to you. So once the GST will come, you would have few invoices which are being charged by your vendors to you on, for example, goods. So if they have sold any office equipment, printers, or any other goods to you, you would be able to take input credit on those goods VAT against your service tax invoices which you have charged your customer. So it will be beneficial for you.
Okay, thank you for that. Here is another question. Of course, how can we not talk about this? How positive will the government of India's black money initiatives be on ease or levels of foreign investment? For example, investors who have to comply with the UK Bribery Act, and you know how it actually goes. Who wants to? Should I again pass this on to you, Kapil?
Yeah. So to be honest, Indian government is going very fast, and they want to go fast because black money is something which they when even they were not in the government, this was one of the agenda points that they want to curb, and they want to bring black money back into India. What they have done recently, they have put in the initiative that they will give a window to the Indians or other individuals, corporates having any money parked overseas. So they will give them a window to get that money into India, so that it will be a very less or some sort of exempted tax rate only for that period, so that black money can come back to India. And in terms of the bribery, they are constant discussion which I'm hearing from the Ministry of Corporate Affairs, that they are trying to change the Prevention of Corruption Act in India, which will be similar to UK Bribery Act going forward.
Brilliant. I think we can't hope for any more. I think I have a question, which of course I wanted to bring this up in the start. Everybody hails the new budget. Everybody talks about how this puts India on a growth curve. I think this is something which is open-ended. The ease of doing business, India ranks anywhere between 140 to 142, depending on the year that you are looking at. We famously had one of the newly appointed ministers say that the ranking should be more like within 50. So, Kapil, do you think that the kind of announcements that have come in through this budget, does this clearly pave way for the ease of doing business improving from 142 to going all the way to, let's say, 50?
I'm saying definitely it's going down. I'm not very positive about we're going to go to 50 next year, but it will definitely take few years to come down to 50, and it will go towards 50 the way it has been with this budget has come back. In terms of everybody, whenever you speak to people in the industry or market, that they are talking about this is definitely investor friendly budget.
Okay. Last two questions. Know that we are exceeding the time limit we have set up for ourselves. Abhinav, can you take this one? Is there anything in the budget that makes it easier to borrow funds in India?
Not in terms of borrowing as loans, but there is definitely, as I mentioned, about sort of removing the distinction between portfolio and direct investments in terms of an FDI. But sadly, there have been no changes that have been suggested for external commercial borrowings. So bringing money into India still is a little difficult. Last year, I think there were some rationalization measures that were announced. Some sectors were allowed to raise funds from abroad in terms of external commercial borrowings. And a couple of years ago, there have been also changes in allowing, quasi-equity securities to be issued. So there has definitely been rationalization over the years, but nothing specific in this budget.
Okay, thank you for that. So at this point in time, I want to open the final poll and get a sense check as to where we stand. So I'm going to start the poll again, requesting the participants to respond to the final poll question. Do any of the proposals discussed here in this webinar affect your business plans or operations in India? The choices that are provided are yes, it makes market entry smoother and sustainable and keeps tax costs low. No, it is still difficult for me to set up and establish operations in India. And again, you have another choice. I find absolutely no change. The poll is open now. Could we just request you to take a few seconds and respond to the poll question? We'll keep it open for another 5 to 6 seconds. Okay, let's close it. Interesting. it's good to see the positive sentiment. I think we feel the same way as you do. Yes, it makes market entry smoother and sustainable and keeps tax costs low. I think that's definitely the sentiment here. And of course, a few of you have responded saying that it is still difficult to set up and establish operations. It shouldn't be a different opinion, but we understand as to where you're coming from. So just to quickly go back and try to summarize things. And I think Kapil, you and I have been talking about this at the beginning of the session. The question that we always want to ask is that at the beginning of the whole discussions and when the budget is being announced, we always ask the question saying that what is our wish list? And we did make our own wish list. And now that the budget announcements are complete and you have had a chance to analyze the budget highlights, Kapil, would you say that there have been any omissions? Do you think there is something which is not covered in this budget?
I think most of the things have been covered in this budget, but for example, the relaxation further in the FDI regulation, which I was not very positive or it wasn't my wish list to cover within the budget. It will come in next 1 or 2 months, maybe in the master circular of foreign direct investment into India when it will come in April, May. But in terms of relaxation of taxation, the regulation, ease of doing business, I'm fairly confident that they have covered most of it.
Good to know. Good to know. Abhinav, could I also get your views in terms of has there been anything which is extremely obvious, which has been missed out, but something that we are still waiting to hear from the budget?
No, in fact, if you look at proposals for foreign investors, I feel they've done much more and than what was expected and what was on my wish list. So there's definitely been a lot of changes. Maybe one thing, and this is just a a personal angle that the individuals for India have not really been touched upon that much in terms of reduction of tax rates or giving any relief. So that may be one bone of contention that everybody has and is always on everybody's wish list when they're looking at the budget individually. But beyond that, if I look, Kapil rightly mentioned FDI, which is due to come out in some time now. But other than that, I think a lot of points that we wished for have been covered.
Okay, fantastic. Very good to hear that. I think with that, we would definitely like to close this session. Before we end this session, we also want to quickly remind you that we have published a white paper on the budget highlights. We know that there is only so much that we could cover in the webinar today. But what we have done is there is a slightly elaborate document which has been published on our website. And what we will do is, along with the presentation used today in the webinar, we will be sending you a follow-up email with details of Kapil and Abhinav with link to the recorded webcast as well as the white paper so that you can receive a complimentary copy. And I know that some of the questions were not addressed today. My apologies. We will definitely get in touch with you individually. And if you do think you have questions which you want to send to us, we will definitely send the details of Kapil and Abhinav, and I'm sure we will follow up after this. Thank you once again for joining us in the webinar session today. And we look forward to having you with us as part of the next subject that we will choose for the Sannam webinar series. Hope you found this webinar session to be useful and insightful. Until next time, have a good day.
Thank you.
Thank you.